Hello and welcome everyone to Financing Philadelphia's Future with Councilmember Derek Green. This is a live question and answer session about creating a Philadelphia public bank. It's actually our second, and we're going to try to continue doing this every month. It only lasts a half hour, so we're going to try to do a lot with a little bit of time. Let me start with some ground rules, and then we will jump into the Q&A. So here's the best way to participate. Why don't you set your screen to something called speaker view, such that whoever's speaking will be the prominent face on the screen. You can do that usually by using the icon on the top right of your screen. I've noticed depending on what kind of tool you're using, it may be different, so you have to switch around a little bit. Enter your questions in the chat interface. We're both on Facebook and on Zoom, so it may be called something different depending on the platform you're on, but we encourage you to start sending your questions. That's what this is. This is a Q&A, so we want all those cues. And when you send your question, so give us your first name and tell us what neighborhood you're from. We're hoping to have folks from all over the city being curious about this process. For example, Joan from West Mount Airy. And if you want to join the Philadelphia Public Banking Coalition email list, you can enter that in your chat interface and we'll be added to the list. All right. So again, thank you for joining us. I'm your moderator. My name is Vanessa Lowe. I'm co-chair of the Power Economic Dignity Team. Power is Philadelphians organized to witness, empower, and rebuild. And I also host a radio show on Germantown Community Radio called Vanessa's Money Hour. And really excited to be here as your moderator today. You all will be muted. Everybody else will be muted except the participants, our guests who are speaking today. So again, use that chat so we can get those questions in. All right, let's go ahead. Let me introduce our guest today. Walt McRee is a senior advisor and chair emeritus of the Public Banking Institute. He's also president of the Public Banking Association. That's a national consultancy of public banking experts working with legislators. He's also a founding member of the Pennsylvania Project, which helped launch the Philly Public Bank effort back in 2012. Welcome, Walt McRee. Why don't you say hello to us so we can see your face?
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here.
All right, great. And of course, we also have Councilmember Derek Green. He is serving his second term as City Council member at large. Councilmember Green has a background in banking and a deep commitment to sustainable economic development, particularly for Philly's Black and Brown neighborhoods. He chairs the committees on finance and disabilities. His top legislative priority is the establishment of a Philadelphia public bank. Please say hello, Councilmember Green.
Hello, Vanessa. It's a pleasure to be with you once again.
Great. All right. So once again, we're going to do just a little background and then get an update. So we've had town halls about a public bank, and Councilmember Green submitted the legislation to City Council in January. So right now it sits in the Finance Committee. And on our last Q&A, the thing that was sort of in play at the moment was an RFP, a request had been submitted to get attorneys to help move the process along. So I'm going to turn it over to Councilmember Green to give us an update on that process.
Well, thank you, Vanessa, and thank you for being here and the work that you're doing. It's a pleasure to be here with Walt McRee for all the great work he's done here in Philadelphia and across the country regarding public banking. We had submitted a request for proposals that was done by the law department in my office, as well as the city treasurer's office, as well as some of the representatives from the Philadelphia Public Bank Coalition who worked as a review committee. We're close to finalizing that RFP with an outside law firm that can provide some additional expertise on some of the issues that we need in order to move forward with the public bank. We anticipate hopefully having that law firm under contract by sometime in April. That will allow us to provide some additional legal expertise that's beyond both the law department and the city treasurer. Also, since the legislation has been introduced and some of the other things that you talked about, like the town hall meeting and other conversations, I've received a lot of information from a number of interested parties on how they can participate in a public banking initiative here in Philadelphia. Also through the great work of the Philadelphia Public Banking Coalition, there's been a lot of information out in um, op-eds, other media opportunities like this conversation we're having today, and we've been having on a regular basis, that's really starting to broaden the perspective on the whole idea of public banking. In addition, we've seen other jurisdictions who've done work regarding public banking. I've had a chance to talk with a contact of mine, Shaman Walton, who is the chair of the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco. That's the equivalent of our city council or alderman, as you have in other cities. And they've also introduced legislation to start a public banking process. They're starting from the perspective of putting together a task force to evaluate how to come up with a framework for a public bank. And so I've started to borrow some ideas from the work they're doing to put something together similarly here in the city of Philadelphia. I'm also curious to hear from Walt, since he's been so involved in this issue, what he's also seen from around the country regarding public banking.
All right, Walt, why don't you go ahead and put that map up, I think, that you have, and let's start with that.
Okay, all right, very good. This is a map of what is going on around the country with public banking. I take it you can all see that. The colored states are where action is on some level. It's either from an organized perspective of citizens coming together, community groups, and so forth, or where there might be some pending legislation. That's another color, and the orange colors are where feasibility studies have happened, or ballot measures, or are currently in legislative discussion. And the legislation has been passed in California, and of course, New Jersey has an executive order in effect, but legislation is also being considered in Washington State, in Oregon, and in New Mexico. It's also before the assembly there. Also in New York, there are 2 bills currently underway there. New York City is interested is in pursuing its own bank. In Massachusetts, a new state bill is being introduced there, as well as in Maine. Maryland is not too far behind, at least it's kind of in line for development here. And of course, we know about Philadelphia and New Jersey. Those are very interesting stories in and of themselves. So things, and of course, as you see, Alaska and Hawaii, didn't mean to leave them out. They also have legislative initiatives that are gestating or are waiting for further articulation. So it's a very active scene around the country with people getting involved with their legislators and their community groups and aligning groups. California has been extraordinary in this regard. They passed a bill last year, AB 857, which really codified the idea of creating public banks at the municipal level, which is what we've seen Philadelphia doing, which was quite a creative departure from the standard approach of let's go get a state bank. Municipalities have their own needs and abilities. I mean, one of the needs I can mention is that Philadelphia spent $246 million in interest payments in 2019 alone. So, and Pennsylvania, $783 million in interest payments alone, not counting fees and all of that stuff. So you see, the money is leaving our communities and leaving our economies at an enormous rate. And so public banks are being seen as ways to kind of staunch the problem, to plug the hole in the dike or the boat, or whatever metaphor you want to use, and so that's taking a variety of different forms. Let's just say, for example, in California today, they launched a Bank California bill, which would be a bank that would give the option, public bank option, so that citizens who are unbanked or underbanked are able to have no fee checking accounts and no fee check cashing capabilities. It would be a digital platform, and they would have access then to to banking services, which cost them so much of their time and money to be able to have their life and finances managed, saved, and available to them when they need it. So that's a very interesting development that is just going into the California Assembly today. New Jersey has the governor's executive order has put an implementation board into place, and they are looking at how they might get that, how they can get that started, considering perhaps phasing it in. And I think that we're seeing around the country that phasing in public banks makes a lot of sense from the standpoint of expense, the need for talent, the time that's required, the regulatory overhead that's involved with being a depository chartered bank. So I would say that, wrapping this up, if I can, that the public banking evolution is well underway all over the country. The Bank of North Dakota model has given us a shining light on the hill to mimic, but we've all seen that it's not necessarily the model that we can actually expect or should expect to put into place, that in fact there are new variants within the banking industry, new technologies, digital currencies, digital platforms for accounting. All of that is kind of in front of us now as we look at how to design the public banks of the future. The important thing is that the people are getting some control on their own money.
Thank you for that, Walt. I want to come back and ask a brief question, but I also want to make sure that we have some questions keyed up from our chat moderators. We have Kyra Harris today, and I believe Peter Winslow, you're also moderating, right? So when you're ready, we'll come to you. But actually, I just want to repeat what I think I heard you say. Philadelphia paid $246 million in interest. Should we add the tag on our own money? Is that how we think of sort of the value of a public bank? Is that we're sort of giving our money to somebody else and then they're charging us interest on it?
That's exactly how it works. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a great deal.
Not a great model.
It's a little like, you've got money in the basement that you could be using, but instead you go to your neighbor and pay them to borrow their money. Now, I'm not putting the bond market down categorically, but that is basically a financial mechanism that cities and states rely on for funding the things that they need to pay for, bridges, roads, etc. So having a bank will certainly mitigate that expense, and maybe someday as the bank grows, they'll eliminate a good portion of it.
Got it. I think you also refers to phasing something, and I may come back to that in a moment, but Kyra, do you have any questions or a single question? Let's do one at a time for our gentleman today.
Yes, we do. So our first question comes from Carol Duncan of West Mount Airy. How is the bank funded? From what city funds? Excuse me, how much will it take to be practical to fund development projects?
Thank you, Kyra, and thank you, Carol, for that question. One of the benefits of having outside counsel will help us to evaluate various perspectives on sources and capitalization for the public bank here in the city of Philadelphia. As you may know, that we had a very significant last year, $750 million that we had to resolve. The mayor pushed back traditional budget address to April 15th. And so this year is projected that we will have a $450 million deficit. However, based on the American Rescue Plan that passed and signed into law by President Biden, the city of Philadelphia will receive about $1.4 billion. 50% of those dollars will come to the city of Philadelphia within 60 days, and the other 50% will come to the city of Philadelphia next year. So we're looking at a lot of different sources, the city-related entities, other entities that are connected to the city as a source of funds for the public bank in reference to development projects, in addition to the issues we talked about, in other conversation regarding the public bank. These dollars can be used not only to try to help small businesses, business of color that traditionally had a challenge getting access to credit, but also cooperatives, which are hard to lend to entities. And when you talk about development projects, I think affordable development type of projects where there's a challenge in getting funding, and also is an area where you can have resources for a public bank, as well as other new ideas and initiatives like clean energy, solar initiatives, and others. Basically, some of the hard to lend to activities are some of the things that we're looking to do with the public bank here in Philadelphia.
Thank you. That's very exciting that we're getting some of that, lots of that federal money. So that's really great. Peter Winslow, do you have a question?
Yes, Vanessa, I have a question from Deb Feigert. It's a process question for Walt, asking whether the various states and municipalities are drafting similar legislative wording for such things as the mission, the governance, the oversight, the audit provisions, and management, or are they going about this in separate ways?
Yeah, it'd be hard for me to say that there is a consistency or through line for all of that, because every community is different and the parameters are different. But I think the concerns are consistent, that the transparency and accountability of the bank be very well established, that there be very clear delineations and separations from special interests and political interests, political control. And we're seeing those items written into the bank formulations and the bills in pretty clear ways. In most of the bills that I've seen, it's not too much. It's not overlooked. The importance of, I mean, that could sink a bank to have private interests, special interests get involved with making the determinations on who's going to get the money. The people have to see where the money is going. They have to also help to guide it there. And it has to be done, again, with transparency and accountability. So very important components of having a successful bank. Banks can get broken. So, you know, word to the wise.
Thank you for that. Kyra, let's go back to you. Do you have one question for us?
Yes. Our next question comes from Tim Brown. How long of a timeline do you anticipate to initiate this public bank for the city? And in tandem with that, putting on your visionary cap, he says, what kinds of problems do you see a fully realized public bank being able to resolve? And I know Councilmember Green touched a little bit on that in relationship to some of the hard to lend to entities, but if there is any room for expansion on that.
Thank you, Kyra, and I'll expand on that as well as reference the timeline. As some of you may have heard that my former boss in City Council, Councilmember Tasco, would often say, you know, want to move in haste and repent in leisure. And so from that perspective, I'm very cautious in putting together a timeline, because I want to make sure that we are doing the best job that we can in trying to create and move forward with this initiative. There are various entities that would not like to see this initiative be successful. So I want to make sure that we don't rush. And that's why we're bringing outside counsel. That's why we're having various conversations with a number of individuals and entities. I just had a call today with a former bank regulator that was connected to me through another attorney contact of mine, and she was a regulator going back to the days when I was at Meridian Bank, and we shared some of the people that we remember from Meridian. And so I want to make sure we're doing this right. And also I see there's another question from Kevin Shavers about some of the risks to the model. And this is somewhat a new initiative. And so we're trying to put together a structure in the city of Philadelphia that we create a municipal authority as opposed to a state chartered bank, and trying to find ways to put together an initiative that's going to have the most success to really address some of those entities and organizations, individuals that have been talked about that have been hard to lend to. And so we're going to continue to do our due diligence, reaching out, and we anticipate having a conversation with the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia and some other entities to make sure we mitigate as many risks as possible. But there's also other opportunities, like Walt talked about, some of the creative ideas we're hearing in other jurisdictions in reference to fintech and technology that can also be used for this initiative. So from a timeline, we're being cautious to make sure we're doing our due diligence, make sure that we mitigate some of the risks and concerns that have been discussed, and make sure that we're moving way that's going to make it as most successful as possible.
All right. Peter, do you have a question ready? We're down to already 10 minutes left. Peter, you're muted. While Peter gets unmuted, I want to turn to Walt, because Walt, we lost Emma Chappelle. Tell us just a little bit about Emma Chappelle, and let's recognize her.
Yes, I appreciate the chance to call up Emma to lift her up. She was an extraordinary pioneer in banking. She was the niece of Reverend Leon Sullivan, who, as you recall, helped to end apartheid in South Africa. Emma was the first Black woman to start a bank in the country, I believe. And in Philadelphia, of course, is a landmark United Bank. Her work there was also with Reverend Jesse Jackson. And she has been a supporter of the Philadelphia Public Bank effort since the beginning. She was one of the first bankers that we had on board to advise. And she has since became a colleague with our group, Public Banking Associates, and has been active, of course, with the current Philadelphia Public Bank thing. She was a great lady, and we'll miss her.
Our condolences to her family and other loved ones.
And if I could just say a few words regarding Dr. Emma Chappelle, who's someone I've known for a long time. I did get a chance to go to her viewing service on Saturday. She was a mentor for so many and part of this coalition. I've had conversations with her over the years, but also as part of this conversation regarding the public bank, and I was able to glean from her some inspiration from the work that she did with United Bank, and when she was able to start that here in the city of Philadelphia.
Thank you. Got to recognize our leaders. All right, Peter, are you ready with a question?
Yes, Vanessa. Broderick Byers is asking a question about, I think this is probably for Walt, about digital currencies and the modern methods of finance using technology. He's also linked it to the idea of a local currency, but that's something that you might want to distinguish in terms of how a public bank can use some of the advantages of modern finance.
Well, when you have a financial institution that has a mission of doing lending and creating credit for the community, how do you get it to them? So we had mentioned, or I had mentioned, to the unbanked and the people without the facility and access to technology. But debit cards, for example, are pretty common, and that becomes a platform that can be distributed to communities that are unbanked or underbanked. That's one semi-digital sort of a platform, but there are other variety of accounting needs and opportunities that come out of simple accounting needs that the city has with its vendors and that the citizens have with their government that can also be employed. Complementary currencies, when you look at money as being a relationship and an exchanging relationship, that too comes into the possible sphere of integration by expanding access to money and to credit. Right now, all of our money is pretty much reliant on coming through commercial channels, privately issued in the name of profit. When the people start to create financial mechanisms that give them a diversity of access for funds, then I think we're starting to get our hands on the levers of power a little bit more, which is really where we need to be headed as a democracy.
If I could join in to Walt's comment, I think the other benefit with a public bank, we've had some conversations about other city and state-related entities that are doing things that have financial transactions, that conversation of SEPTA and their fare cards, if that could be something that is connected with a public bank, and as well as how we find ways to incentivize people in the city of Philadelphia to shop with local vendors. That could also be a possibility through either the SEPTA initiative or the SEPTA initiative coming into a public bank. And I just want to lift up Oscar Belo's comment to everyone And he is right that Maggie Walker was the first African-American woman to start a bank in the United States. However, Dr. Emma Spell was the first African-American woman to start a commercial bank in the United States and was the first vice president of a major bank in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, gentlemen. All right, it's 4:55, but I think we've got time for at least one more. Kyra, do you have a question?
Sure, we'll make it a brief one. This one comes from Jerry, asking what lobbying efforts is the commercial banking industry mounting to slow the momentum of establishing the public bank? So what obstacles are we currently facing right now from the commercial banking industry?
And I'll try to answer this and maybe try to swing in and answer some of the other questions very quickly. I've actually been somewhat surprised. I've actually had calls from various officers at banks who were curious and interested about public banking, want to aid in the process. I haven't had any direct lobby opposition. I have heard from another banker who stated that as a part of an organization he was part of, they've taken a position generally in opposition, but he himself was not taking that same position and was really interested in having a dialogue. And I think with some of the goals and objectives, and we have a conversation, I think we can address some of those concerns. From the perspective of Ms. Pamela Haynes, who asked about the advantage of municipal authority versus state chartered bank, one of the reasons why we went the municipal authority route as opposed to state chartered bank, based on the research we did with HRNA, it takes a lot of capital and resources to actually take an entity to become a state chartered bank. Also, you're open to the regulatory perspectives of a state chartered bank. So it was based on the research that we did with HRNA that we decided to do the municipal authority route as opposed to going the route of doing a state chartered bank, which we think would have had a additional burden regulatory oversight. And that goes back to a conversation with Dr. Emma Chappelle from the perspective of when they started United Bank, the goal was to provide lending to as many people as possible, but a lot of the regulations as a traditional bank hampered their ability to do some of their initial goals. And so that's what led to us doing a municipal authority regarding a state chartered bank. And then I see one other quick question I'll try to jump in regarding specific tasks being asked of the outside legal counsel. Those are questions in reference to, for example, the Federal Reserve. Can we, as a non-member of the Federal Reserve, go to the discount window to be able to borrow from the Federal Reserve and have that done as a non-member in reference to some of the challenges and opportunity that we would have regarding some of the changes to the Community Reinvestment Act? Could we receive support from traditional banks as investments under the CRA? And that's been some recent changes to the CRA as well. So those are some of the very technical issues that we're looking for to try to get addressed to make sure that we are doing all the risk mitigation we talked about earlier, but making this initiative as broad as possible to help as many people that we can through this opportunity.
And I would just add, if I may, that from the national perspective, the banking associations typically do line up in opposition to these initiatives, despite the fact that, as we point out, how important we think community banks, credit unions are. They really are key players into the stability and the vitality of local communities. They're going away. It's a big concern. But the bankers associations, often supported by the very, very big banks, have some very influential impact into some certain state legislative corners and have definitely made their presence known.
Couldn't be almost more perfect. It's 4:59, so we need to close up. Thank you all for attending, and we look forward to seeing you next month, the fourth Tuesday, 4:30 to 5, Q&A.
Thank you.
Thank you much. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.